I was living alone in a small rental house just outside town when this happened. It was a one-story place at the end of a short dead-end road. There were only 5 houses on the street, and at night it was usually quiet. I worked from home doing freelance digital animation, so most days I didn't leave unless I had to get groceries. I didn't get visitors often. My friends usually messaged me online before coming over. That's why the first knock stood out. It was around 8:45 at night on a Thursday. I was in the living room watching television when I heard 4 firm knocks on the front door. I muted the TV and waited, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then there were 2 more knocks. I got up and walked to the door. There's a small peephole in the center of it. When I looked through, I saw a man standing on my porch holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He was wearing a dark windbreaker and a baseball cap. He looked normal, maybe mid-30s. I opened the door but kept the security chain on. He immediately said that he had a parcel that required a Henko stamp or signature. He read a name off a small handheld digital device. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. I told him he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at the device, then back at me. He read the address out loud. It was my exact address. I told him no one by that name lived here. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he said he must have been given the wrong information and would take it back to his vehicle. I watched him walk back down my driveway. I expected to see a delivery moped or at least a car parked somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. He walked past my mailbox and turned the corner at the end of the street. I didn't see where he went. I shut the door and locked it. I told myself it was just a small private courier company delivery, or maybe a contractor driver without a marked vehicle. The next night, at almost the exact same time, there were 3 knocks again. This time, I didn't open the door right away. I went to the peephole first. It was the same man with the same jacket and box. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it and told him he already came by and that no one with that name lived here. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he just needed a signature and that the system showed the package had to be delivered tonight. I told him I wasn't signing for someone I didn't know. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Okay," and stepped back from the door. I stayed at the peephole. Instead of walking away right away, he stood at the edge of the porch looking at the house. He slowly turned his head toward my front windows, then toward the side of the house, then back at the door. After about 15 seconds, he finally walked down the driveway. Again, I saw no vehicle. That's when it started to feel wrong. On the 3rd night, there was no knock. I actually felt relieved. I thought maybe he figured out the mistake. I even joked to myself about how weird it would have been if he showed up again. On the 4th night, I was in the kitchen washing dishes around 9 p.m. when I heard 4 knocks. It wasn't on the front door. It was on the side of the house near the dining room window. I slowly walked into the dining room and looked toward the window, but no one was there. Then there were 4 more knocks at the front door. I went to the peephole and it was him again, but this time he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I didn't say anything and he knocked again. Then he stepped back and looked directly at the peephole. I stepped away from the door so he couldn't see movement and I didn't make a sound. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before checking the windows. I walked around the house with the lights off and looked through the blinds. I saw him standing across the street near the tree line. He was just standing there facing my house. After maybe a minute, he walked off into the darkness. I relocked every window and door again, even though they were already locked. The next day, I called the local police neighborhood COBOL line and explained what had been happening. The officer I spoke to said it sounded like someone trying to verify occupancy. He said sometimes burglars will knock to see if someone answers before trying to break in later. He told me to install security cameras if I could, and to call emergency services if the man came back. That night, I left all the lights off in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom. Around 8:45, right on time, there were 4 knocks. I didn't respond at all. After a few seconds, 4 more, then silence. I waited about a minute. Then I heard something else, a soft thud against the back of my house, and then another. I realized it sounded like someone testing the back door. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the hallway. I could hear the back door knob turning slowly, and then stopping, and then turning again. I called the emergency line like I was instructed and whispered that someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the knocking started again at the front door. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The back door knob kept turning. There was more than one person. Then I heard the sound of something metal scraping lightly against the doorframe. After about 30 seconds, everything stopped. Even as it was totally silent though, I stayed on the phone until the police arrived. When they searched the outside of the house, they found fresh pry marks on the back door near the handle. The officer told me if I hadn't been home, the door likely would have been forced open. They drove around but didn't find anyone suspicious. The next night, I stayed at my brother's apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone on social media or anything that I wasn't home. I just left. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down. She said there was someone standing on my porch knocking repeatedly. She said he had been there for at least 5 minutes. She asked if I was home. I told her no and asked if he had a vehicle. She said she didn't see one. I told her to call the police. Officers arrived and questioned him. Later that night, an officer called me and said the man claimed he after he was caught attempting to break into a house where the owner was out of town. In his car, they found multiple empty cardboard boxes and a small handheld scanner that wasn't connected to any real delivery company. During questioning, he admitted he would knock with a fake package first. If someone answered, he would leave and mark the house as occupied. If no one answered after multiple attempts, he would come back later and force entry. He told detectives that sometimes he would knock several nights in a row to see if the pattern changed. If lights were on one night and off the next, he assumed the house was empty. Hearing that made me realize how close I was to not being home that first week. If I had ignored the door on one of those early nights, he probably would have come back later expecting no one inside. I moved out of that house 3 months later when my lease ended. I still don't answer the door at night unless I know exactly who's coming over. If someone knocks unexpectedly, I stay quiet and check cameras first. And if anyone ever shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I don't even go near the door anymore. This story starts in the lead up to midsummer. To set the scene, I live near Malmö in Sweden. I stay with my parents, siblings, cats, and dogs. We're a close-knit family and often spend nights together in the living room, watching TV, playing games, and catching up on our lives. At the time of this story, I was 16, turning 17. I was in high school, but getting closer to leaving and starting my education outside of it. In the days leading up to the festival, during one of those late nights together, we were watching an old classic Swedish film. We often have movie nights around midsummer, and it's one of my favorite things about that time of year. During the movie, we heard a knock at the door. This wasn't unusual, so we didn't think much of it. My mom, Sophia, got up to answer it, but nobody was there. The street was empty. Our garden wrapped from the front of the house around to the back, so she checked along the side of the house too, but there was nobody there either. She came back inside, and we resumed the movie. A few days later, I was sitting at the living room table doing exam work when I heard another knock. I paused my work and went to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. We assumed it was probably neighborhood kids playing a prank. Where I'm from, kids sometimes get bored and cause trouble instead of finding something better to do. In Sweden, there's a game called Kanako Spring, where kids knock on someone's door and run away laughing. It's stupid, but as a kid, the adrenaline rush of someone opening the door to nobody there can be weirdly fun. We have a family group chat where we keep each other updated on things, and throughout that week, several family members mentioned experiencing the same thing. The one that stood out the most was something my dad, Henrik, experienced. At the time, my dad usually stayed up later than everyone else, either playing video games or watching shows once the house was quiet. One night around 11:30, when the street was silent and all the kids would have been inside, he heard a very quiet knock. He was confused because of the time. He checked through the peephole before opening the door, but he saw nobody. He slowly unlocked and opened the door to look outside. Again, nobody was there, just a quiet, empty street. He locked the door and came upstairs to ask if anyone had heard it, but because the knock was so quiet, nobody else had. This started to unsettle us because it had been happening repeatedly. Nobody had ever seen or heard anyone outside except for the knocking itself. Usually when kids do this, you hear them laughing or running away. This felt different. Midsummer Eve is when everything escalated. We spent the day with family opening small festive treats, sharing gifts, watching movies, playing games, and eating way too much food. It was a great day. Later that night, I felt sick from eating so much traditional pickled herring and potatoes, which I always do during holidays, so I went upstairs to lie down. I ended up dozing off and woke up hours later. When I checked my phone, it said 2:01 a.m. Everyone else was in bed, and the house was completely silent. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, because once I woke up, it's hard for me to sleep again no matter what time it is. I stayed on my phone in the dark scrolling social media instead of turning the TV on, watching summer holiday haul videos and messaging friends who are still awake. It's normal during summer break when there's no school or responsibilities, and you try to enjoy the freedom before going back to exams and routines. After a while, I heard a faint knock. I wasn't sure if it came from my door, my window, or if I imagined it. I sat up straight in bed, staring into the dark room with my heart racing. I didn't want to move. I knew nobody should be outside at that time on midsummer night. I didn't know if the past few weeks were just getting into my head or if someone was actually inside the house. My room is on the second floor, so someone being at my window would be very unlikely. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to open my bedroom door. As I did, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My brain immediately assumed it was my dad coming up to bed after staying up late like he usually did. I stepped into view. I saw him. I wondered if this was the person behind all the knocking. He was already inside the house. He was staggering as he climbed the stairs and looked heavily intoxicated. I slowly backed into my room, luckily without him seeing me, and I quietly shut my door. I could hear him walking around and opening doors, going into each room one by one. I remember thinking it was only a matter of time before he reached mine. I completely froze and didn't know what to do. It felt like all my common sense disappeared. Eventually, I opened my door slightly and saw him coming out of my younger sister's room. That's when my brain finally kicked back into action. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them there was a man inside the house. My mom woke up instantly while my dad was still groggy. We went downstairs together and found the man passed out on the couch with my dad's snaps and beers opened and scattered around him. My mom shouted at him to get out. He woke slightly and angrily insisted the house belonged to him. We tried to get him up, but he was completely dead weight. My mom slapped him, trying to wake him, but he barely reacted. A few minutes later, my dad came fully downstairs, saw what was happening, and immediately took control of the situation. He shouted at the man that this was not his house and threatened him to leave. The man refused. My dad eventually had to physically lift him off the couch and drag him out the side door. He forced him outside and warned him not to come back before shutting the door. We thought it was finally over, but seconds later, glass suddenly shattered toward us. The man had punched through the window, sending broken glass inside. He pushed his face inside the broken glass like something out of a horror movie. While my dad went to call the police, the man started shouting aggressive threats, saying he now owned the house, that he knew what we looked like, and that he would return. Needless to say, we were all in shock. It was hard to believe someone would do something like this on a festive night. Eventually he left, and the police arrived. They took statements from all of us.